are live. You know what? I like that little jig so much. I think I'm going to play it one more time because we had some tech trouble. So I want to make sure that you guys. Okay, now I'm in the right mood. I had to listen to that one more time. We had some little tech issues here, so we are good now. And I'm so excited to be doing the first Sipping Tea with Sabrina live stream for 2024. It's very exciting. So, welcome. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Sipping Tea with Sabrina. So, in a second, we will be sharing the tea on insurance for nonprofits. But if we've never met before, I'm Sabrina. I'm the founder of Supporting World's Hope, a business consulting company. I started after 25 years in the nonprofit industry. I help nonprofits and business driven businesses build relationships that increase revenue through strategic planning, board education, and leadership development. And we're going to have with us today a very special guest when she comes on screen. And you notice I said she, you will see that it's not Nico. Nico did have tech issues again, and he had some things to come up. And so Lorena Garcia with Infinite Group Insurance was so gracious to step up. And we are so excited to have her here. So I am going to bring Lorena to the screen now. Like I said, we've been having some tech issues this morning. So, go with grace. So, Lorena, you're on the screen now and you are live out there as people are coming in. So, as people are coming in, of course, I always like to acknowledge when people come in. I see again the tech is teching, man. We are having some issues with Facebook. So we're having issues. So I'm going to remove and see if we can stream back into Facebook. I tell you what, today is one of those days, Lorena. How are you feeling today?
Great, great, great.
So I am going to be gracious with your time. I promised you we will be in about, 45 minutes. So as people are coming in, because we got started a little bit late, we'll see some questions at the end, hopefully. And if not, we will get through. And so for the people out there, you're not Nico, as I was saying, much more beautiful than Nico, but may I add. And Nico did have some troubles, and Lorena really graciously stepped up to step in. So, Lorena, share a little bit about yourself and your experience.
I am currently an insurance agent with Infinitus. I am the manager here at the Property and Casualty Department. I've worked in the insurance industry for more than 10 years, I could say. If I remember to be exact, I started doing this since I was 16. So here I am still. I made this my career and love it.
Wow, no wonder you look so young because you are young.
Thank you.
But you have been doing this for a very long time. And
Yeah.
actually, when our nonprofit, Village in the Valley, secured insurance, officers and liability insurance, we went with your company, and you guys were very instrumental in ensuring that we got the right coverage. So, and that's why we're here today, because a lot of nonprofits don't realize what types of insurance they need, or they may have questions. So, with that in mind, I have a set of about 7 questions here that I'm going to ask you, and please feel free to elaborate on these, share any circumstances that you may know of. I have heard some horror stories out there. I don't want to scare anybody, right? So we're going to get into
Hmm.
the questions. And as some of the stories come up, maybe I'll share throughout. So, one of the first questions that I have is, what are the essential types of insurance coverage that nonprofits should consider to protect their organization and their assets?
Yes, ma'am. So most than anything, just thinking as a nonprofit, we want to make sure that we, of course, have the right coverage. We may think nothing could happen. First, the liability, the general liability, that's the number one. We want to protect ourselves against a lawsuit. Um, it could be employers, working in the field and any third party, incidents that could happen. You want to make sure you have your liability coverage. Another coverage we want to take in consideration is directors and officers. You may think, why would I need this coverage? Well, it could so happen that an employer can come back and say, I felt discriminated. Well, here comes the directors and officers coverage that will represent you and insure you against those type of misrepresentations, lawsuits that come against the employer, directors and officers, misleading information most than anything. Another one, we don't think about the autos. What vehicles are we going to be using within this nonprofit? What are the activities that we're going to be performing? Are the employers going to be insured? Well, let's say example, we we're in an event, we have to move the car around. We let an employer do that. We're in such a hurry, so busy that we don't think if they're insured or not insured, added into the policy. We have to make sure that we have every single cell of this nonprofit insured. Because if that employee reverses, hits someone, it's a big mess. Guess who's going to be liable? You're going to stay with the laws, and it could be a big impact in the nonprofit. So we've got to make sure that we insure the liability, which is the general liability. We want to take a look at the autos that we're going to be using in that nonprofit, directors and officers, cyber liability. We also have cyber liability that we can offer. um, so many coverages that are out there that we may not even think that we could be liable for.
So I do want to say this because I used to be a grant administrator for CDBG, which is
Hmm.
Community Development Block Grant, which is a federal grant. And a lot of nonprofits who work with low and moderate income clients can receive that grant. But here's the kicker: in order to receive that grant, you have to have three insurance. You have to have the directors and officers liability insurance that you spoke of,
Hmm.
to have general liability insurance,
That is
and you have to have auto insurance.
auto.
And
That's
a
very
lot of,
important.
yep,
Very
those
important. You
three.
may think you can cut corners and say, no, we're going to try to, swing it through the side. No, you got to make sure that you are fully insured in those autos. It's not, it's totally different for your personal autos. You can't be using your personal autos in an event. Um, Something gets to happen, you're busy, you're such in a hurry, you're trying to make this happen, and you're not thinking straight. That could put you in a big liability, that a lot of things can happen. You never know, the employee um, reverses and hits someone from the public. That's a liability, a big loss that you may encounter. So we want to make sure that the vehicle is insured under a commercial, not a personal, and that the employee is at it. Now, if we're going to have part time employees or volunteers, talk to your agent, make sure they're aware, because, yes, the main ones, general liability, directors and officers, and make sure that commercial auto has the correct people included.
Perfect. And so, with that in mind, I'm going to give a scenario and ask this question. So, I serve on a nonprofit that's an all volunteer nonprofit.
There you
And this
go.
past weekend, we had an event, right? So, let's say we don't, I'm not confessing this on camera, I'm just giving this as a scenario. let's say we don't have liability insurance. We had an event that had about 100 people in there. Can you explain the importance of liability insurance for nonprofits in general, even if they have volunteers or paid staff, and how can it safeguard against potential lawsuits or claim? Keeping in fact that we do these types of events all the time and invite the public in. Can you explain the importance of that insurance?
Majorly, yes. It is extremely important that you protect yourself. And of course, like you say, um, you want to make sure that you are completely insured, like I mentioned, with all these coverages. You want to protect yourself against these big lawsuits. Make sure you talk to your agent on the activities. One thing I do want to mention is do an analysis, a risk analysis that could happen, worst case scenario. This is going to protect you against these big lawsuits. You really, really got to protect yourself. Take in consideration every single, like I mentioned, every single scenario, every coverage that you could take in place. Probably you guys don't have the funds, but it's good to know that you are aware of what could happen.
So let me ask you in this way. So let's say you have an event, you do have directors and officers liability insurance. You do have the directors and officers insurance, but you have an event and someone gets hurt at the event. Does that insurance cover, what does that insurance cover? And is that equate to having liability insurance?
So that could be you got to make sure the responsibility of each coverage. Directors is not going to cover against a liability that arises from an employer's practice. Let's say there you guys, let's say in an event, you're performing and you're an employer leaves the court, someone trips, breaks an arm and a leg. Directors and officers is not going to cover that, nor is this special event. You gotta make sure you have the correct coverage. A general liability will cover that. You gotta make sure that general liability has the medical payments included, to others, of course. So yes, you got there. Every coverage has its own responsibility.
Okay.
Directors and officers will not cover what general liability covers, nor will property, cyber, etc.
Okay. And so it's my understanding that directors and officers insurance protects the board members from
Yes.
being sued personally.
In case, yes, personally, even misconduct of funds, it could be, there could be misrepresentations. They could get accused, directors and officers accused of misleading funds. That will cover them. So directors and officers is very important to have within the nonprofit.
Okay. So I'm going to ask this question. You said risk management, but, and you also alluded to some nonprofits, some, and we have a variety of nonprofits that's listening, from those who are just starting up to those that are well on, mature, and they know about these insurances. But someone who's in the startup phase, what I want you to speak so that they can understand that what they need. So I'm going to ask a question. So the first one is, I've always been told at minimum you need directors and officers liability insurance. Is one of the
Yeah.
questions that I ask before I join the board. Do you have that insurance? Because I don't want to be sued on a personal level.
Yes, and some officers won't even join
Right.
if there's no directors and officers because they know they could be um, sued by vendors, customers, or other parties in general. They
Okay.
want to make sure that they are protected, and
Yeah.
it is very important.
That's one of the things. And then what other factors really should nonprofits consider when determining the appropriate insurance policies and their coverage limits? Because let's say you have directors and officers liability insurance, and that's all
Hmm.
you have. But now you're putting on, let's say if you're putting on community events, if you, and or you're putting on special events for fundraising, what other appropriate insurances should you have, and what should those limits be? The coverage limits, you think?
Yes, we gotta make sure we have the correct limits. We There's from 2 million up. It all depends on what coverage we're looking at, of course, but to have sufficient coverage in case a claim arises. We want to make sure. Generally, there's actually, let me go to, let's say, they if you have an event, some limits won't even be accepted. Like 1 million, you have to have from 2 million up. I mean, 2 million, it's not much of a difference in price if you do from 1 million to 2 million, and you could just go, further on. But make sure that you have a good coverage. The liability limits are very important, as you don't know how much the cost of a loss could be.
And I know that, again, having worked with um, federal grants and actually now bidding on some things, it always says you need to have a $2 million a two
Yes.
million dollar
They'll
limit.
yeah, they'll specifically state there what limits are acceptable. If not, they won't take any other.
Yeah. And
And
so
if
let
you
me
could go higher, go higher. It's best.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question too. So a lot of nonprofits, and in the nonprofit that I worked for, we may use someone else's facility, or we partner with a school district, or we partner with a city or other entities. Is that general liability insurance? Is that the insurance that covers those partnerships? Like if something happens in their facility? I know a lot of times when we partner with different, if we partner with the school district, we had to name the school district an additional insured on our policy. Is that
Yes.
a normal way to do business?
So as an additional insurance would be added, just as you mentioned, the school districts have an interest in that event. So they're gonna want to be added into the your coverage. They would there so you mentioned property and
Hmm.
also rented. So
Hmm.
your general liability is going to cover any damages that your profit or employees, anything that arises from you to them. That's your general liability. Now, your property, let's say the nonprofit has a building where you conduct, that is not going to be covered by your general liability. That's a totally different policy. Property coverage, you want to make sure you are also covering your assets, of course. Like I mentioned, number one was I mentioned the vehicles, the property, the building itself. You need to understand the difference between the general liability and the property. General liability will cover to others to a certain limit, of course. That's why it is so important to know what limits you have. There's a cap there that covers, let's say, damages to others. It could be 5,000. You want to make sure you talk to your agent and you increase that limit, because let's say you were in an event. um, you could probably help me out on this one. The worst case scenario that could happen is
I've had
you
people
crashed
fall
into
over
a
here.
wall.
Yep,
I'm not
people crash into walls, people fall over
crash into
here.
a wall.
Yep.
So I don't think that's gonna be $5,000 in
Yep.
coverage. So you may think, let me save some money and leave it as 5,000, 10,000. Try to think ahead of time, of course. Worst case scenario, any type of risk you all could be involved, so that increase those limits. It's best if you are insured, because when the loss really happens, you're gonna be lost. You're not gonna know what to do. um, that is important, like, and to mention, like I said, the difference between general liability, going back to that, and the property. Make sure you also take in consideration the property coverage for your office, your building, your property, your assets of the nonprofit. Totally different.
Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm listening and I'm like, okay, I'm processing what you're saying. So I've written down one, two, three, four, five different types of insurances. I'm going to restate them and then I'm going to ask a question and see if we missed anything. So you
Mm-hmm.
said property insurance.
Property is one, yes, ma'am.
Yes. And property is facilities
The
and
facility,
equipment.
the nonprofit facilities where
Okay.
you and your employers, conduct business or,
Okay. That's employers, that's your
ev-
board members, that's your volunteers, any physical property where you
physical
conduct.
property that you own,
Okay.
that the
And
profit owns.
okay. And is that property also the contents within the building?
So yeah, you want to make that is in that policy. You can definitely include the contents, within the building. That is also insured in the property. Yes, ma'am. You can include it, endorse it, or exclude it.
Okay. So then the other one, that's number one, property. You said general liability insurance.
General liability is, yeah, that's a very important one because you want to make sure that you are insured in case, and that's probably the first thing that someone wants to, you know, the lawsuit that will initially happen, which it's a lawsuit against the nonprofit.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned vehicle insurance. Now, let me ask this
Yes.
for from beginning to end on the vehicle insurance. Let's say if the organization does not own a vehicle, but the employer or the volunteer is using their personal car for nonprofit business, how would that work?
Okay. It is very tricky.
Hmm.
It's very tricky. As an agent, we're going to have a million questions.
Okay.
We're going to have a million questions. Number one, does this vehicle have any logos of the nonprofit?
Mm.
As soon as you tell me, yes, we have, but it's a magnet. As it is my personal, whenever I'm working, I put it on and take it off. To me, as an agent, is no. It's a red flag. You don't do that. To me, even if it's your personal vehicle, it is considered for the business, even if you're an employer. Now, it is the responsibility of the employer, of course, to make sure that they have, even if they don't have any vehicles, that any vehicle that is being used for these events has the proper coverage, which for us will fall into commercial. We don't want, uh, like I mentioned, that logo being there during the event. That is automatically considered you're doing business with that vehicle. So, proper thing to do, the right thing to do is obtaining the coverage for that vehicle as a commercial vehicle, as it is considered for nonprofit. Um, I would, as an agent, I wouldn't even take the risk. I'm even nervous just to think it could be temporarily just for an event. No, 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 no. We've got to make sure that it is insured the right way.
Yeah.
Because if when let's say something happens, it was
Hmm.
temporary, it was a couple of hours,
Hmm.
it's personal use. I don't think in a court of law they're gonna understand that. They're just it's going to be a settlement because it was within working hours,
Hmm.
period. That is considered commercial. Guess who's going to win? The lawsuit is going to come against, and of course they're going to give them the rights to. Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Very, very well said. You said what you said. You stand
Yes.
by it. So I hear you. Um,
Yes.
so then the other one that you said, so that's three. Then we talked about directors and officers insurance.
Yes.
And that one I think we were pretty clear on. I know
Yeah,
I want
directors and
to,
officers is, yeah, protecting people who serve as directors, the company for personal losses if they are sued, as by employees, vendors, or any other parties.
yeah,
Directors and officers. That one's very clear.
yeah. I
Hmm.
won't serve on a board that doesn't have directors and officers.
Yes, you know what? I'm not very familiar with nonprofit. Of course, I haven't been in the field, but what I do know is the coverage that you do need in case, all this arises. Some will say if there's no DNO, directors and officers coverages, I won't even join the board.
Yeah.
So that is very number one.
Yeah, that is number one. And just to give a story to like nail home that point, like if you are and if you are a board member for any nonprofit organization and something happens at an event, someone trips and falls, and they can come and sue you as an individual if you don't
Yes.
have DNO
You just
involved.
don't know. There's so many. Yes, there's so many. You may think, oh, directors and I'm protected. So many little gaps in between that could be, like I mentioned, in a court of law, anything can be put on the table, and you will be amazed,
Yeah,
amazed of the lawsuits that will come.
yeah,
So people are out there just to sue
yeah.
and to get
There
some
they are.
money. And they know, even they're in a nonprofit organization and they're based on funds and stuff. Oh, they know that there's limits behind this, liability limits. They're smart about it. They're probably gonna go to that event, probably make sure they trip or say they got harassed. You just don't know.
You don't know, and
You don't know.
that's one of the things that I said, and especially if you're dealing. Look, I'm going to say this one because I worked for 20 years in youth development, and for when you're dealing with youth, there's additional insurance that you have to have because of background checks and things that can happen to youth. So there's even that, and if you don't have directors and officers liability insurance, again, they can come after you as an individual. So that one has been like nailed into my head. And then the
Yeah.
one you said that I wasn't as familiar with is the cyber. I'm not
The
as familiar.
cyber security, yes, cyber is something that you may think, why would I need cyber? What in the world is cyber? Cyber has along the way, cyber has gotten, as losses have arisen, like cyber has gotten big in coverage. Cyber is going to cover you in case, of course, it's data breach. It's involving data breach.
Mhm,
Making sure that you're securing the customer's information that is very sensitive, as social
mhm.
securities, driver's license, credit cards, accounts. You want to make sure you take that in consideration. You don't know, what if you trusted an employee with all this information. You had an event. Um, Example, they were such in a hurry. You gave them a hard drive and they forgot it. They lost it. And this is important information. Cyber insurance will come in place and be able to help you under that loss, that liability. It could come, all these coverages could be activated. They're going to come and sue the nonprofit. Um, all of them could kick in within that matter. So it is important to consider cyber. Cyber is really important.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to be a lot of different insurances, and some nonprofits are going to have to make some tough decisions. And these are one of the things that
Hmm.
you do have to budget for,
Yes.
because you don't want to play that what if game. And as
Yes.
I mentioned, I worked with federal grants, and I knew we needed to have the vehicle, the general liability, the directors and officer, and property. I forgot about property. But
Property.
in your work, have you had people call you up or know that they said, are there say I need to get this insurance because this grant is asking for it, or this funder is asking for it, or this agency is asking for it? Are there any that we're missing from this list that are
So
specific?
yes, some funders will be very specific on what they want. They'll even have one be added as additional insureds,
Hmm.
and another could be that they want a specific wording because they want to be protected. And I'm sure you can help me out with this one. There's so many there. They could be very strict about within the premises, within the contract, the engagement of. We They want to make sure that it is added in your general liability, in your, mostly in the general liability, because they're gonna protect themselves Like, it's gonna fall in your general liability, not under our responsibility. That's your, I'm
Yeah.
sure you've come across, if you like to share something like
Yeah, I have,
example.
because I spent 20 years in Boys and Girls Clubs.
There you go.
Yeah, we had to have Boys and Girls Club of America on our general liability insurance in case of a lawsuit. We did a lot of partnerships again with school districts and housing authority, the county, and all of them. We had to have listed separate policies for each one, up to $2 million, as you
Yeah,
indicated.
they'll be strict about the limits, the
Mm-hmm.
wording,
Mm-hmm.
adding as an additional insured. They're gonna make sure you have, if you don't comply with these coverages, you won't get the contract. And take in consideration, there could be a line. I'm not sure how this worked, but there could be, some people waiting, and you're not prepared with the coverages. Someone else got the opportunity than you did. So you got to make sure you have your general liability, your directors. I know that it's every funder that will ask for certain coverages, not all of them. To them, the cyber is more of the nonprofit's responsibility to think, am I really going to need it, not needed it? Do I really want to protect my employers as well?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, remember, we also have volunteers. There's
Mm-hmm.
also volunteers accident. There's a volunteer accident policy out there. You Temporary events. Something I probably didn't mention. We're talking about what coverages could offer. There's event liabilities. Even if you have your general liability, you can also purchase an event liability only specifically for that event. Why? Is there going to be any alcohol involved? Is there going to be any bull riding? Those, it's just going to be for 1 day or 2 day. It doesn't hurt to purchase that event liability coverage. It's extra. It's probably going to be $280 for that specific event that has more risk that your currently general liability could cover. Event liability is, and I went in the weeds with the event
Mm-hmm.
liability now,
But no,
but
that's good. That's what we need to know.
yes, it's something that not many people know. They may think, why can I just call my agent and endorse? Well, yes, but let's say you have an event in 1 week. The agent is gonna ask 1,000 questions, and your policy, your policy is gonna change completely due to one event. We're gonna endorse it. That could take some time. It could be more money. That's gonna be, the cost of the policy will be more expensive. And event liability is something you purchase per event because there's more risk to it, as bull riding. If you're gonna set, some uh, games for the kids that are gonna be, at they could be at risk. So event
Moon
liability is
jumps,
something to
or what
consider.
people call them, inflatables or moon jumps.
Inflatables, I couldn't, yeah, I couldn't think that fast, but inflatables, all these kind of good stuff. And for volunteers as well, there's also a volunteer, because you don't know, there's going to be some volunteers. You want to make sure that they're covered, that they nothing comes against the nonprofit. In case, within that certain event, you can cover, protect yourselves from anything that could arise.
Okay, let me ask you a question, because I want to make sure I'm clear so that the
Yes.
audience is clear. Okay, so if I have general liability insurance, does that general liability insurance cover volunteers, or do I have to have a separate volunteer accident insurance?
So no, it won't. You would have to call your agent, make sure you let them know that, how many volunteers. It could be also how a certain, it's not going to cover. So the volunteers are not going to be covered. Let me get that in general liability. You would be more for your employers. Now we're talking about employers or
Mm-hmm.
volunteers, period.
Mm-hmm.
They're totally different coverage.
Wow. Okay.
Employers would be workers' compensation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That would be one that could be considered, but they're
Right.
not full-time employees.
Right.
They're only volunteers. Because you have, I'm sure your full-time employees,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to have your volunteers. That's
Okay.
where the volunteer accident coverage comes in place.
Well, I think I might have been underinsured. I had general liability, I had workman's comp, but we did use
Yeah,
volunteers.
it's actually it's an extra financial support that you're obtaining, and you want to make sure that anything that comes unexpected
Mhm.
due to events that happened. Yeah,
Okay.
but the volunteers, you want to make sure you cover them, and we why not?
Okay. So if okay, let me paint a picture for you. So
Yeah.
you're gonna
Okay.
maybe I was underinsured all this time and thought I was together. Okay, let's paint a picture. Let's say if you do youth sports, for example,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and you have general liability insurance, but you use volunteers to coach the youth sports, right? Not
So
your employee.
taking consideration, general liability is for third parties, not for your employers,
Okay.
not for the volunteer. So general liability is going to be third parties to whatever to covering what the nonprofit could be liable in case of let's go again with an event. But that's
Mhm.
no coverage for your employers. That's
Okay, that's
protecting the
fine. Let's say, what
nonprofit.
about that volunteer who's volunteering to
But the
coach the team?
volunteer, so okay, so the volunteer is obviously just gonna come in one event. They're gonna help out. Let's set an example. You guys are serving food, hot dogs. They
Okay,
get burned with the steam of a pan.
okay.
Now there's medical expenses that are gonna arise from there. It was a third-degree burn. You send them to the hospital. It goes on and on and on.
Hmm.
You want to make sure that so the volunteer coverage, it's going to reimburse you for medical expenses associated with immediate treatment or injury that a volunteer suffers within the event. um that's not going to fall into your workers compensation because
Right.
they're not a full-time employee, they're volunteers only.
Correct. Correct. I got that. But let me ask you again in this scenario, and I'm sorry I'm tripping you up because
No, no,
I'm
no, it's
looking
okay,
out
it's
right
okay.
now
We have
going,
so many
maybe I wouldn't
coverages.
cover it.
Yeah, there can
So
be confusing.
yeah. So sports. Let's go back to the sports analogy.
Yeah, okay.
Sports league. I have a volunteer coach that's going to volunteer for six
Okay.
weeks coaching a team. They're out there coaching the team. They rah, 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 rah. They trip, they fall, they hurt themselves. What insurance covers them?
Okay. So, what will cover them?
Hmm.
If we have the volunteer accident, that will be perfect. That will cover for their medical expenses.
Never had it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So, and you're protecting your workers' compensation, of course, etc.,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
not have a big claim there.
Hmm.
Now, they come, let's say, for example, you're covering now with the volunteer the medical expense. But
Hmm.
what if they say, I want to sue them? They're going to fall back into the general liability. But yes, it's going back to the coach, the falling, and them being insured. The volunteer would be very helpful for it.
So, the volunteer accident policy will
Volunteer
pay for
accident
the medical.
will cover their medical. Hmm.
Okay, if they decide to sue, the general liability will cover the lawsuit.
Yes, for that. So you
Oh,
have now, you're covered in medical, and of course, general liability will always go back to it because nowadays some people just think, oh, let me sue for let me throw some a little extra if there are people that think that way.
okay,
But
got
that's, yeah, in medical you can definitely be protected with the it's smart to get the volunteer accident.
okay.
Let's say you don't even have workers compensation, you never named them even though they're volunteers, but they're not common, they're not full-time employees. Of course it's best if you obtain a volunteer accident coverage.
Okay,
Mhm.
that is interesting. I think I got away. I think I was blessed. I don't think I ever had volunteer accident
We don't, in the
insurance.
state of Texas, it's not required to have workers' compensation,
I have
but
worked in comp, but not volunteer accident.
then yeah, with so many lawsuits and of course the large numbers of losses and claims within the nonprofit, the volunteers, and anything that that has been arising, the volunteer accident coverage came in place, and which is very smart because it's by event, so you can
Okay.
just purchase that per event. It could be the event and the accident together, and you're covered. You're going to be able to be covered the event you're hosting, and of course the volunteer that you brought in.
Okay, and that's
Hmm.
in about $280, give or take, is not
Give or take,
too
like
bad.
280 per event. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. I think I just got educated on something. I need to call my old organization and say, y'all might want to look into some volunteer accident insurance.
Yes, it's actually very smart. It's very smart to do it because why not? Why
Hmm.
not be protected? And if something arises, don't worry. Here you go. You got it. You're
Okay.
protected.
So this leads me to not my last question, but my next to last question. In the event of a claim or an or any type of incident, what steps should a nonprofit take to kind of like navigate that insurance claim process effectively?
Yes, and it's very important. Some people, well, in case some we have a loss, we're not thinking straight. Make sure that everyone is safe. That's number one. And of course that there's no that you're not at risk. Second is call your insurance company, make sure they know that you explain to them to be able to to manage that help you out and guide you throughout the process. um, that's what the initially we ask for. Number one is your safety, make sure that everyone is good, and contact your agent as soon as possible so we can be able to guide you through and help you. um, we want to make sure that you have the right guidance.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm. And
Thank you.
covered in that.
That makes sense. Call the expert. You pay for the insurance, call them when
Yes,
you
yes,
have
yes.
to let them activate it and take
Yes.
it there. So, final question for me. Are there any common misconceptions or pitfalls? I mean, you named a couple. I found out I fell into
Yes,
one regarding insurance coverage that nonprofits should be aware of and how they can avoid them.
I think we go back to understanding each coverage.
Hmm.
Each coverage has its different responsibility. You may, like we mentioned, there's so many coverages that you could get confused in who covers what. I think that's the misconception that anyone can have. You may think, oh, my general liability is going to cover for everything. Don't confuse the word general with covering anything that could arise. No. General liability is just making sure that you are covered in case of a lawsuit that comes against you that is within your work, the work area or the employer's. That's nothing to do with, like we mentioned, with the workers' compensation or the every coverage has its own responsibility to cover. Property is one, directors is another one, general liability is another one, your auto, you name it, the cyber, even
You
crime.
gave me seven insurances, and some of them I had not heard of. I tell
Yeah,
you.
even crime. You never know. There's actually crime insurance out there, so there's so many coverages that could help out. Make sure that you have peace of mind. That could be the misconceptions that could come in place within the nonprofit that it could be misunderstood.
Perfect. So at this, those are my, I just want to recap these insurances: property, general liability, vehicle, directors in office, cybersecurity, event liability, and volunteer accident.
Volunteer to new.
Two new. Those are the two
Yes,
new.
they're
And
out
what
there.
springs to
They're
the
out
table?
there.
I hadn't heard of that
Yes,
one.
they're
Um,
out there. They're out there. They're at your reach. You just need to ask your agent. It could get complicated sometimes whenever you're gonna have an event and there's gonna be one thing to really know is that yeah, you have your general liability, it covers, but when you first initially spoke to your agent to be able to purchase this policy, there was certain risks that you were exposed to,
mhm.
but every event is different. So we're gonna have to be calling our agent in every single event to tell them. And it's some insureds don't do this, but every risk has it needs to be named in the policy. So an event liability is gonna make sure that you are covered for that specific event and that risk. So that's what it
got
is
one last
important.
question that's not here. I got a question. I see some questions in the the, the comments. I'm going to ask their question. I'm going to ask my question first.
Okay.
That's my priority. Okay, so you said something interesting. So if you do a gala, let's say, and this is something I learned along the way, right or wrong, this is what I learned. You do a gala, you may or may not have insurance, I'm going to be honest. But you say,
Exactly.
okay, I'm going to give 3 tickets per per guest for alcohol. Does that cover you if someone goes out and have an accident in the parking lot, or they got drunk because somebody else gave them their tickets? Does that?
That needs to be specifically named at the initiation of policy.
That's what I thought. I
It
thought you were
needs
going to
to
break
be
my heart and
named.
tell me something.
Many
Okay.
agents will exclude that in order to save, or some underwriters will completely say, we're not insuring that. And you're gonna bump into walls with a couple of companies that because I wanna name that I am gonna host with alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
then there is where um you need to the agent itself will say, I'm sorry, I don't have a company to insure you, but in an event, the event liability could definitely come into place. It's
Okay.
going to be only one event. You don't want to pay um that premium for the whole year if you're really not going to be hosting with alcohol. It's probably
Oh,
not even going to be in the books, right?
right.
But
Right.
some people think, out of the box thing. Why not throw it in there just in case? You don't have to. You
Okay.
can purchase an event liability for that specific event with specific limits, of course,
Mm-hmm.
because you really, I mean, it all comes back to speaking to your agent, making sure it could be insured. And if it's not, then what's the B plan, which could
Gotcha.
be the event liability.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm.
So here's the question we have. What if we are leasing space in a building? What kind of insurance do we need in this case?
Okay. So general liability is going to have its coverage for that if you're leasing. It's going to have damages to rented premises. That's one. But of course, you're leasing, you want to make sure that you have coverage for your contents itself. Like, are they ask? It all depends what the contract states. What is it that they're asking you to? Are they gonna? Is the leaser gonna ask you to insure the building, or just asking you for general liability so nothing falls in their place, in their plate, in their claim? That's where it really is. What's the agreement they have between? But we can definitely insure if they're asking you to insure the property, we can do that, and it's only going to be the dwelling, of course, and your personal belongings in there. That shouldn't be your responsibility, but it all depends the agreement that you have. But your general liability, of course, will be the number one.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
because you are
Um,
renting that premise, you are being leased, so
okay.
that also there's coverage with it. Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm glad they asked that question because if anybody has any questions, please put them in there because we are overtime. Oh,
And there,
girl,
yeah,
I told
these are,
you.
yeah, and we can definitely take a look and what is it that they're asking for, and we can go, between the weeds and see what coverage we can offer for them.
Yeah. So, can you tell the people how to get in contact with you if they're looking for any
Yes.
insurance or feedback on what they actually have?
Yes, so definitely you can email me or call me, text me also. I'm always multitasking, so I think this world nowadays it's all multitasking. Can you please quote me and, but email me. We have my personal email is Lorena, Lorena, at theinfinitisgroup.com. If you have any questions or if you like any quotes, go ahead. And we also have by text, you can also do that or call to 956-303-3131. That would directly come into my cell phone, and I'm more than glad to answer any questions or guide you, etc.
Perfect. So, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for stepping in and filling the
I was a
gap.
little nervous, I'm not gonna lie. It was the first time I do this, so
You did
forgive me.
wonderful. You did wonderful, and I
Thank
really
you.
do appreciate what you bring to the table because we get a lot of questions around insurance, and even I mean, even someone who had my organization was pretty big, and I'm realizing we had some gaps in our insurance. So take the time if you're
Yeah,
listening to this either live or in replay. Take the time to look at what insurance coverages you have and get them assessed, as Lorena said. Look at what
yeah,
you have, what you need, where your gaps are. In the meantime, if you have any questions about fundraising or how to engage your board of directors, board education and fundraising, I'm your girl for that. And you can visit the website at www.supportingworldhope.com to connect with me. And we are at the end of this. So I will leave you with this, as I always like to do. Your mission matters and deserves to be highlighted in your community. Your mission matters and can be an inspiration to those who need it the most. Your mission matters and deserves to be funded to its fullest capacity. Thank you for being with us today, and I will see y'all later.